Hi, Kevin Ledoux, the Pragmatic Luther at Ledoux Guitars. Today I've got something that the guitar makers I hope are really going to love. Um, when you have to make rosette strips or rosette tiles, first you have to make strips. And when I say rosette tiles, they could be any configuration. Case in point, you've seen this before, but there's only what, 6 or 8 tiles around this, but they've got to be made thin. You got to make strips of something 60 70 thousandths of an inch thick. um, Here's another one that you've seen before, but this is smaller individual tiles, but they're all black, so you don't see the seams in them. But still, you've got to make these things up. um, Other examples would be, little pieces like these, or in wood like these. Well, the fact remains they've all got to be milled at a certain thickness. And I usually do that at 60 thousandths or thereabouts, because that's what my pearl is when I buy that in. So I try to keep them the same. Well, the frustration is, how do you make strips that thin? I mean, you could make them really large and drum sand them down or something, or you could hope to hit 60 thousandths with a table saw, but I've never found that to be reliable. And the trouble comes in, how do you do this with a drum sander when you've only got a short strip like this? This is only 5 inches long. And sometimes your rosette material is precious because maybe it's a burl or something, and it's a small piece. So you can't just run it through equipment exactly the way you'd like to. So I have a device, or a pair of devices, I guess, to show you that may help you get started on making these thin strips for various inlay or rosette work. Now, you can cut thin strips on a bandsaw, but the problem that you run into there is that as you keep ripping strips off of a billet, you have a rough edge unless you want to plane that edge or reflatten it constantly, which can be trouble and very time consuming and sometimes even wasteful. Um, as you keep ripping against that edge is going to deteriorate, the edge or surface. It's going to deteriorate, and therefore it will not move through the saw in a nice straight path. So the problem is not that the bandsaw won't cut nicely straight for you. The problem is maintaining that perfectly straight edge without refining what you've just cut. And as I said, if you have precious material like a piece of burl or highly figured wood that you are working with, or you have material like this whose length is finite, when I get it, this is the length it comes in, um, you have to have another way. Well, I got thinking about that a while ago, and I said, bandsaws in sawmills and even circular rigs, they operate on a principle where they don't ever try to guide the log by some sort of fence. They lock the log down in position and they move the entire carriage over closer and closer to the blade. And by moving into the blade and cutting and then moving into it again, they get consistent results. So what I did was, I have two of these devices that I can show you. Um, this one I made for my 17-inch bandsaw, and this is for my 14-inch bandsaw. And these are simple. Anybody can make these. All you need is a piece of plywood for a platen. Now, I'm not going to show you the step-by-step on making these, because I think it's too simple. Anybody can do this. Uh, so I started with a piece of plywood for a platen, and I screwed on this, a strip of wood, exactly like that strip that you would use in your miter gauge for your table saw or bandsaw or whatever machine uses a miter gauge. And these are easy enough to make, but if you have any trouble with this, you rip them out, and if they're a little too wide, then you can hand plane them down or drum sand them down until you get a snug fit. But you want a nice snug fit, and you want this to travel very nicely. The beauty of this system is that the distance from the edge of the jig to the position of this strip doesn't matter too much. In fact, you make this distance greater than it needs to be. In other words, this distance from the edge of the miter gauge slot to this edge that will bear against the blade, make it too wide by, oh, quarter inch, half inch, whatever. That way you set this in the miter gauge slot of your bandsaw, and when you send it through, it's going to rip this edge and make it parallel with this. That's going to be nice. Now, it's also a good idea to make sure that this whole piece of plywood is nicely square. It'll just make fabrication much easier. So then I just made 2 strips of wood and screwed them onto this thing at right angles to the whole works. And I'm going to pull this apart so that you can see down in here. So I've just made a track, so to speak, for this next piece to slide through. And it doesn't need to be dovetailed in or rabbited, because it doesn't need to be locked down. It's going to be anyway. And you do want this to be a nice smooth fit. You want it to slide nicely, but you don't want any real slop in there. That's not going to be a good thing. And in the front of this, I put this fence on it, and I cut a couple of dados across there so that they correspond to those cleats right there. So this rides back and forth. And I locked it down very easily. Underneath here, you can see there's a T-nut. And quarter 20 is good enough. Larger if you want, doesn't matter. A quarter 20 works nice. Keep a lot of T-nuts around your shop. And I use an awful lot of quarter-inch hardware for jig making because it's handy and it's available everywhere. So I keep quarter 20 T-nuts and quarter 20 thread rod, nuts, bolts, wing nuts, and so on. Buy yourself a few fender washers for larger applications like this. And I just screw this thing down on here. And now this makes this adjustable. So now I've got something that's going to move material toward the blade. Well, it's simple. You're asking already, I can tell. Well, how are you going to keep it there? And fortunately, we're not doing planks and boards. So by putting double face tape on my workpiece, I can just put the double face tape on my workpiece, and there it is. Tape it onto that surface, and now it's there nicely permanent, so to speak, at least as permanent as we need it to be. And now we're ready to do some cutting with this. And as I mentioned, this one is for my 17-inch saw. This one, same thing, exactly the same construction. Very easy to make, very easy to make. And you can even, you can see with this one that I dadoed these strips in to this plywood platen. It just made these easy to install and easy to keep them square. So there's another advantage. And I just, see, it's just a scrap of plywood. I've used this to make a test circular cut. So it doesn't have to be anything special or furniture grade, just nice and flat is good. And here I have a piece of material already double-faced taped to this thing. And I'm going to take you over to the bandsaw and show you how this thing works and what kind of results you can get with it. Okay, so I've got my device here, and I install that right in the miter slot. And I have my workpiece attached to the fence. And the first thing that I'm going to do is line up this side of the blade with the surface of my material. Now, this is not perfect, I'll admit, but if you're gingerly about this, you can move that material in and out until you're flush with those teeth, probably within just a few thousandths of an inch. And when I say a few, I'm going to say probably 4 or 5, I'm guessing. So I've established something flush out here. But then I have to determine how far do I need to advance the work each time I make a new cut. And I've done that by setting up this block. This is a magnetic block. You could do this with a piece of wood and clamps, whatever you have available to do it. And I've found the best way to get yourself in the neighborhood is to use a feeler gauge. And I've just set up a few leaves here, and I have adjusted this thing so that my, whoops, keep lined up here. And now I just adjust this until my block is in the right position. And if it's not, uh, it's actually easier to take a soft mallet like a leather mallet and tap that in and out of position until you get what you want. Now, none of this is going to be perfect, but it's going to get you very nicely in the neighborhood. So test cuts are always appropriate. Now, I'm not going to move a whole bunch of things here because before filming, I did get this block set where I wanted. And if your material is precious, you're going to want to use any scrap material that you have available to set this up and make a test cut. And then once you have this established, pull your carriage out and take your test piece off and double face tape your real material on it. But now, as you can see, all I've got to do is advance, excuse me, a little dust in there. All I need to do is advance my material over until it touches my stop block and tighten down, and then I can make my cut. Now the phone is hanging from the bandsaw and it may vibrate, but we'll see what happens. And a nice slow travel is the best way to do this. You're going to get much better results if you move slowly. Now, I'm using a 6/2 per inch blade, which seems pretty adequate. If you happen to have, for this purpose, a bandsaw blade with 10 or even 14 teeth per inch, you can get better results so that there will be a minimum of rework afterward. My hand is in the way of the camera, sorry. And I'm going to reach out and catch this. I've removed the throat plate from my bandsaw so that the dust collector has a little bit better chance to pick up that dust. So there it is. Now the whole carriage slides back. We advance the material once again, and we just make that next cut. Once more, a nice slow feed. So there's the strips that I've made up. And these are holding pretty good at about 70 thousandths of an inch right now. From here, of course, you can do any number of things with these. You can then make them into tiles, as those that you see here, in any size you want them to be, any width and any length that you can get out of them. But you can also make strips like these. Uh, these these take a little more work and some refinement, but these are 65 thousandths by 65 thousandths, and these can be used nicely around a rosette, and they can even be used as purfling around a body because this particular material is not wood. This stuff is a little bit flexible, but it's a little brittle. But if you use this for a purfling, with just a little bit of heat from a gun, you can heat this and bend it with impunity, and it will go around a body just like you were doing pearl around a body. So there's a lot of applications for this same device and this same technique. Um, just quickly, here's some laminate stuff that I put together. It happens to be, I believe it's bog oak and some padauk and a strip of maple in there. You know, you make up a piece of this that's 3/4 by 3/4, and you can rip off a bunch of those and save yourself a lot of time having to refine each piece as much. There's still some to be done. Here I've made up some strips of herringbone material. It's much easier to cut these off with the technique I just showed you than it is trying to rip against a fence. And of course, when you book match these, hope you can see that end there. You get that nice arrow point, that herringbone pattern. Here's another block. This has been cut. I don't know how many layers are there, 50, 60 layers. And you can see it's been reassembled to show that herringbone pattern. Anyway, there you have it. I hope you got something good out of this. And again, I want to thank anybody for watching. And I hope you'll put a like on the video and subscribe to my channel if you have not done so. This is Kevin Ledoux at Ledoux Guitars, the Pragmatic Luthier. Thanks again for watching.